will they be ready for either kindergarten or first grade? Done lots of qualitative research that indicates that parents and teachers and administrators all believe in this approach. It's great in terms of kids' physical development. It's wonderful in terms of their social emotional development. Kids that don't talk inside, talk outside. You know, there's a whole litany of things that people identify as benefits. But there's this nagging concern, like, if my kid's going to go into first grade, are they going to be behind academically? So we've been trying to answer that question. That question is a little bit bigger. The question is, being ready for kindergarten or first grade, what does readiness mean? There's the two camps are readiness means early literacy and numeracy, or it means the development of executive function. And a lot of early childhood folks nowadays say really the capacity for executive function, really kind of critical period up between about 0 and 7. The development of executive function is a better predictor of later academic success than early literacy and numeracy. So the specific research project that's happening here in the Prior Lake School is because the Prior Lake School has half of their kids doing nature preschool and half of their kids doing traditional preschool. All the preschool programs, I was just there today, all of the preschool programs are nice, high quality, developmentally appropriate preschool programs, but there are these two different approaches, and the demographics are pretty equivalent. So it's a nice little case study opportunity for us to compare the development of executive function in the nature preschool kids versus the traditional preschool kids. So I'm working with Julie Ernst at University of Minnesota Duluth. Graduate student has just finished all the pre-testing, and then the kids will be post-tested in the fall. I had the opportunity to go to 4 different classrooms back to back today, nature preschool classrooms and traditional preschool classrooms. It was fascinating. This is one of those things that I recommend if you can go do a bunch of little visits back to back of early childhood education in different settings. Really fascinating to see the wide range of difference. I'm not going to talk about that too much. Okay, so that's why I'm here. The thing I'm going to talk about tonight is this concept of childhood and nature design principles. So let me explain what I mean by this. From 30 years of teacher education and working with kids and working in some international situations, a lot of collecting maps from people of their childhoods. A classic thing of saying, draw me a map of your neighborhood when you were 10 years old. Tell me about the important places. From all that kind of observation and a lot of literature, I started to see the recurrence, the emergence in a kind of phenomenological way of certain recurrent childhood play patterns or motifs. So all around the world, and it follows a kind of pretty consistent developmental trajectory, children construct and make special places if there's the right setting and the right parental attitude. And it doesn't matter what culture you're in, as long as it's a safe growing up environment, kids will do the special places thing. And I'll talk about a variety of other recurrent play motifs. So since they exist and emerge independently in cultures that have nothing to do with each other, there must be some genetic basis to them. That's going into what the genetic basis is for them is another topic. But there must be some genetic basis. There must be some natural selection virtue to all these play patterns. So it's like, what animals play certain ways because it prepares them, provides some kind of selective value for their survival. So there must be some selective value to it. And moreover, it's what kids are fascinated by. I have watched kids build forts over and over and over and over and over again. And at a certain point, I think, aren't you guys tired of this stuff? It's like, let's use these play motifs as design principles. Let's take them and say, okay, if we're designing a nature preschool, or if we're designing a 5th grade social studies and science curriculum, let's think about these play principles as play motifs as design principles, and try and tweak the way in which we get kids engaged so that it encourages the depth of their involvement. So I'm going to describe the play motifs design principles. I'm going to show you illustrations of them and then show you the application of the design principle in designing interesting curriculum. The examples that I have for that are mostly upper elementary school examples. And then I'm going to go back and show examples of the design principles being applied with more in early childhood settings. So that's kind of the trajectory that I want to follow. I'm going to start with a little bit of this, what's happening in modern childhood. This is from a parenting magazine article, probably about 20 years ago now. So I love this. This is a parent kind of, musing on her own anxiety. She said, I want to stand in the front yard and sing out their lovely names at dusk, referring to her own children, and have them suddenly appear in the damp yard around me like little fireflies, but I can't let them roam. I don't have my mother's confidence that the world is a safe place. Something irreplaceable has been lost. A certain sense of freedom and fun has gone out of the world. The golden age of childhood is gone. So I don't think that the golden age of childhood is gone. I think it's going, and I think it's our responsibility to not let it die. I sometimes think about the, Tinkerbell drinking the poison, and her, her flame, her tinkle is dying, and so the audience has to believe in Tinkerbell. So I think that's where we're at right now. Is you got to believe in the culture of childhood and try and see if we can preserve it. This wonderful author, Edith Cobb, who wrote a book and an article, the only 2 things she ever wrote, and they were both called The Ecology of Imagination in Childhood. And she says, there's a special period in the middle age of childhood, from about 5 or 6 to 11 or 12, when the natural world is experienced in some highly evocative way, producing in the child a sense of some profound continuity with natural processes. So what she means is that there is a sensitive period, not a critical period, but a sensitive period in between 5 or 6, and it's probably a little bit earlier, 4, 5, and 6, and 11 or 12, when the organism is biologically inclined to bond with the natural world, and to develop this sense of oneness or continuity with the natural world. And what we tend to do right around 5 or 6 is separate them from the natural world. We extract them. And so what we need to be doing, if we want to take advantage of this disposition towards bonding with the natural world, is do the kind of things that you're doing, this nature preschool, forest kindergarten, and and nature-based education up through the elementary grades is what needs to happen. And then Louise Chawla is looking at all the autobiographies of environmentalists, found that when environmentalists reflect on their childhoods, the 2 salient things that always come up are many hours spent outdoors in a keenly remembered wild or semi-wild place, and an adult who taught respect for nature. That's kind of the formula for nature preschool or forest kindergarten, right? Access to play in a semi-wild place and adults that model respect for nature. So this is then a couple of researchers at Cornell said, well, let's not just look at environmentalists, let's look at everybody, the standard adult population. And so they did a study where they looked at different kinds of childhood experiences in nature and adult environmental behavior. And the experiences of childhood nature were wild nature, domesticated nature, and environmental education. And what they mean, wild nature play is basically building forts and damming streams and that kind of self-directed nature play. Domesticated nature play is gardening and stuff that's programming that's more delineated and defined by adults. And then environmental education is, going to the nature center and going to the school program week at the nature center in the woods. And then adult behavior was turning off the lights, buying products because they've got certain greenness to them, those kind of behaviors. The really surprising finding in this study was that wild nature play correlated with adult environmental attitudes and behaviors, and domesticated nature play correlated with environmental values, but not so much with behavior, and environmental education correlated with neither. And everybody in the environmental education community that knew about this study kind of groaned and doesn't really want to talk about it. The authors quickly said, not a fine-grained enough study to differentiate between different kinds of environmental education, and the environmental education that is kind of more developmentally appropriate versus the more didactic forms of environmental education. This is, E.O. Wilson says it in a slightly different way. Hands-on experience at the critical time, not systematic knowledge, is what counts in the making of a naturalist. Better to be an untutored savage for a while rather than knowing all the names of things. So his point is that you want the primary experience rather than the didactic experience. And here's another piece that explains one of the problems here and the reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. So this is 4 generations of range in one British family over the course of about 80 years or so. So the really big area was the great-grandfather could walk from one end of that to the other in 1918, about a distance of 6 miles to go fishing. So when this child's 8 years old, he could walk 6 miles to go fishing, way over there. The grandfather, which is this kind of circle over on the left, at age 8 was allowed to walk on his own 1 mile into the woods. The mother, aged 8 in 1979, allowed to walk to the swimming pool about a half a mile away. The son, aged 8, in what was, I think, about 2010, allowed to walk on his own to the end of the street. Roger Hart did a study in Wilmington, Vermont, same thing in 40 years. So from 1972 to the early 2000s, the same change in the range of children exploring the natural world had happened. The reasons, of course, parental anxiety. There's no real difference in danger to children between the mid-70s and now, but the anxiety and fear about danger to children has increased significantly, probably as a function of media saturation. So the bonding with the natural world that in a lot of cases in our childhoods happened implicitly is not happening now, and that's why nature preschool and environmental education that allows the exploration of the natural world and provides play opportunities in the natural world are so important, because that allows the bonding that's going to lead to environmental behavior. So then we get to the design principles. So if we're going to construct programs around that allow children to play in natural places, here are the kind of things that we should be doing. Here's the things they want to do, the play motifs. Let's turn them into design principles. So constructing special places, hunting and gathering, making small worlds. Special places, by the way, is different. Special places is kid-sized places. Small worlds is miniature places. Animal allies, which means close, extended relationships with animals. That includes kind of pets, but it includes other kinds of wild animals too. going on adventures, fantasy play in the natural world. I was in one of the classrooms I was in, we're baby raccoons. Let's see where we can hide, right? That kind of fantasy play. And then maps and paths. I'm going to go into a little depth on a couple of these. So the special places phenomenon has an interesting, pretty regular trajectory through the developmental stages. It starts with kids around 3 or 4 making blanket forts and pillow forts and put the blanket in between the 2 beds. That whole process, it starts indoors early on. This is my son when he's around 3 or 4 years old, and I would come home and once again the living room would be torn up and it would be unnegotiable because there was this kind of pillow forts and tunnels and that kind of stuff, and I felt like I'd created a monster. Here he is on the beach in Costa Rica. Driftwood beaches are one of the best places for kid play because it's got loose parts. So the whole premise, the whole loose parts principle is that what kids want in play environments is loose parts that they can use to reassemble and make things out of. This was a great fort on the banks of the Swanee River that the kids, this is a channel from the I'm down at the river. There's this excavated channel that goes up through a tunnel into a fort that then has got a structure built on top of it. This is my kind of child Americana. This is hay bale forts, right, which are basically disappearing because baled hay is disappearing, right? So a hay bale for a 10-year-old is a loose part. Those big rolls are not loose parts, right? and so this kid's hay bale fort. I've collected lots of descriptions of three-dimensional hay bale mazes, right? So I'm interested to hear if anybody here did this, where you basically you pull out lower down bales and you make tunnels in the baled hay, and then they go up and around, they go where they're kind of like three-dimensional spaces. Incredibly dangerous. Here's this other kind of fort, found forts in between the garage and the fence, right? So that space where there's like 2 or 3 feet of, between the border, that's the fence, and the garage, that little sliver or little alleyways, those are often used by children for special places. This actually was a stable for these 2 9-year-old girls who were doing horse games. That's a whole nother little story unto itself of 9-year-old horse games and horse play. So, little developmental theory from a guy named Joseph Chilton Pearce is that what's happening with children is that they're moving through a series of matrices. The first matrix is the womb. The second matrix is the mother and family. And each matrix is a safe place to stand and a source of energy and a platform from which to explore the next matrix. So you think about the womb in the first 2 trimesters, you basically bond with the matrix, and during the last trimester you're preparing for movement into the next matrix. And that's why in the womb children become sensitive to music and light during the last trimester, and so that whole idea of talking to your child and music and things like that are appropriate because the child's getting ready to move into the next matrix. So in the first half of each matrix, so in the mother and family matrix, from 0 to 4, you bond with the mother and family. From 4 to 7, you get ready to move into the earth matrix. So this is the sweet spot for nature preschool and forest kindergarten, is this 4 to 7-year-old thing when you're still kind of grounded in the mother and family, but you're starting to explore into the earth matrix. By 7, you step out of the mother and family matrix into the earth matrix, Between 7 and 11, you bond with the earth. And then between 11 and 14, you start to prepare for the movement into the social matrix, self and society matrix at 14. So between 7 and 11 is when you need to move out of your home and into the physical world, which is what forts are all about, right? This is another way to look at this whole process of children's movement out into the world, is that for 5 and 6-year-olds, the significant world is the home and school. For 7 and 8-year-olds, it becomes the neighborhood. For 9 and 10-year-olds, it becomes the community and watershed. And then for 11, 12, and beyond, it becomes the larger world. And so curriculum should follow that movement outwards. Let's say, so I showed you some examples of special places and the kids' desire to create them. So then let's turn it into a design principle and let's use it to design curriculum. So I was just talking to some of the elementary teachers at Jeffers Pond about this today. One of the simplest things you can do is, with your class, is let each child have a special place somewhere in the school ground or woods or meadows near the school, right? And you take them outside. Each child has their special place. A lot of people, this is referred to as sit spots. And the kids go there and journal or do some kind of work, but it's the relationship between the space and the child that becomes the encouraging place for kids. And so it's taking the special place thing and bringing it into the curriculum. If you know my side of the mountain, it's the classic 5th grade book when kids are 10 years old. It's about this boy who goes off to live in the Catskills on his own, makes a home inside of a big hemlock tree, catches all his own food. So this is what 10-year-olds want to do. So teachers in a middle school classroom in Antrim, New Hampshire, they read the book, they go out and build forts. And then another teacher, this is a project from a 5th and 6th grade in Harvard, Massachusetts, where children have to go and they have to make a map with certain parameters. It's got to be to scale. It has to include observations of flora and fauna that are at this space. There has to be some poetry or some writing about what it feels like to be in that place. And so and it's got very explicit parameters that are math and science related that relate to the standards that she has to teach in the curriculum. So she does the mapping of the special place project to get kids engaged with the math and science specifics that she has to get them involved in. So here's another example of the special place map. So she took the play motif, translated it into a design principle, created a curriculum project, then engaged the kids in the project. I'm going to do another one with small worlds. So this is, the desire to make miniature worlds. Fairy houses are the obvious example of this, and there's been a lot made with the whole fairy. There's this eternal fascination with the creation of fairy houses. Fairy houses can become fairy worlds, right? So this is, docks and boats and bridges and things like that. Sandbox play is small world play. Kids love creating small worlds, and it's great. It's great when you provide things that you can that you can kind of solve problems with. I just watched at an elementary school today. In the preschool, the teacher had gutter parts on the playground that kids could then put together and roll things down it. So kids want to make these little worlds to explore within. So here's a really interesting translation of the small world principle, the small world design principle. And a woman that designed this went to Madurodam, which is a miniaturization of Holland, a working miniaturization of Holland. And she saw adults be fascinated with running this giant miniature version of Holland. Said, well, if adults are so into this, it's got to work for kids. So she created a summer camp program, which has become a curriculum program called the Game of Village. The Game of Village is, and the Game of Village is all done at a scale of 1 to 25. So this is done with middle school age kids. So there's some fairly sophisticated math and economics with it. So in the beginning, you make a peep that's about 1/25 the size of an adult. So it's about this big. And your peep has an alter ego. And once the game gets started, your peep talks. You don't talk. When you're talking, it's your peep talking. The character of your peep is talking. And some of the kids choose peeps that are alter egos that are contrary to what they're normally like. So this child was a troublemaker and her peep was an angel. So you've made your peep, you're given a piece of twine that's 1/25 of an acre on each side. So the actual acreage area is 1/525 of an acre. You're given the twine and you go out and you homestead a piece of property. And so in this case, it was along this shoreline of this little pond. And so you put your twine down, and once you've got your twine down, you have to fence it, and then you have to make a temporary shelter for your peep that's waterproof, because your peep now has to live in the temporary shelter while you build the permanent home. So then there's a whole woodworking component where, and there's an economy that backs this up. So you get a loan from the government that you then use to purchase materials at the shop. There's a hardware building materials shop. So you purchase building materials, and then you build your own home. Now there's also kids that are hired to be the bankers and the public road crew and the public utility. And you actually have to pay taxes, I think it's twice a week on your property, because we've kind of shrunk it down because this happens in a 5 or 6 week period. So you build your home, and the homes get kind of fancy, and then it's kind of natural for small businesses to emerge. So some kids become clothes designers, and they'll barter with other kids for garden design. I'll give you this dress if you'll design a garden for me. There's also the Public Works Department thing. I love this one, is that the Public Works Department had laid out a road in the village, and where it was laid out, there was a yellow jacket's nest. So there had to be a town meeting to decide, are we going to eradicate the yellow jacket's nest, or are we going to reroute the road away from the yellow jacket's nest at greater cost to the taxpayers? Right? And so the great classic, natural preservation of the natural world, or what makes economic sense here. So I love this because it's providing kids the opportunity to solve problems at an appropriate, visible scale, rather than trying to get them to deal with, should we put the shopping mall in the marsh? Same kind of thing, but the kids kind of get it when, yeah, my taxes are going to go up if we do this. So at the end, this building was not a kid-made building. This is an adult-made building. At the end, all the properties get assessed. Everybody gets taught how to do assessments, and so all the properties get assessed. You get paid back the difference between, you have to pay back your loan. So you get back in value the difference between your original loan and the assessed value of your house. This is a good capitalism teaching curriculum, right? If you've improved the value of your property by a lot, you make a lot, and then there's an auction, and kids get to buy stuff with the money that they earned on the increased property from their value. And you get into, there's a great Parents' Day, and parents come and visitors come and they make their own peeps, and there's rides for the peeps. And one of the interests, this illustrates the property valuation issue of why is waterfront property assessed at a higher rate than backlots? And then the kids have to start like thinking, is this fair that we assess waterfront property higher? So that's a great example. Do I have it? Yeah. Let's take that, the same small worlds principle, and apply it to a 7th grade curriculum on the history of land settlement in Vermont. So teacher does a curriculum project on, what was it like when in the 1760s people are moving to Vermont. You got the charter allowed you to get a 50 or 100 acre piece of property from the king, essentially, or the king's agent, and homestead it. But to homestead it, you had to earn permanent ownership, you had to improve 5 acres. So that becomes the interesting problem. So what they're going to do is they're going to go onto the nature trail at the school. They're going to stake out a 4x6 rectangle. That's going to represent 5 acres. And the students then have to build a house, a barn, a pasture, an orchard, this whole set of things. So here are the kids staking out the property. This is what the farm looks like when it's built. Then they have to make a map of the farm. So they do a sketch map outside. They do finished maps back in the classroom. Here's another one that's an example of one of these finished maps. And then they've got to write journal entries that are the people who lived on the farm in the 1780s, talking about their life on the farm. So I'm sitting back to a tree watching the broad brook as it tumbles and dives over rocks, hitting the banks on the side with such rhythm. I wonder why is it that our lives cannot flow so smoothly as the water. Recently for me it's been less like a calm, nice brook and more like an overflowing waterfall. So much death, so much work. It seems as if nothing at all could go easily, but that is what life is all about. The Lord will always reward our hardships in the end, and that makes our lives here satisfactory. I love the way this has the kind of the vocabulary and the cadence of the language at that time. So the contention, the premise here that I'm advocating for is that the small worlds play of being able to build the farm allows the kids to kind of in conjunction with the actual, book reading, allows the kids to enter into it and then kind of have a sense of what the living experience was really like at that time. Here's one other one. I love it here in Guilford. It's constant joy that every season brings from its flowers and sun in the summer to its sledding in the breezy white winters. I love its small and woven together relationships, both in the families and within the town. I now sit here reflecting on my life and what will come of those who will live on past me and will carry the family's name throughout the history to come. And so not only is it good academics, it's building that sense of place, right? You want to kind of connect kids to the place. This child, Sarah Carpenter, actually when she chose her piece of property from the original land grant, the kids actually had to choose a piece from the original land grant. She chose the Carpenter plot. So she is the family who's going to come 7 generations later. It was a very nice little piece of it. Okay, so that's the idea of, okay, we've taken these play motifs, turned them into design principles. Let's see what it looks like more at the early childhood level. I don't have as elaborated curriculum examples, but special places. How do you foster the creation of special places? Certain kinds of plantings lend themselves to the creation of bowers and small places that kids love to go inside. So hollowed out logs as play pieces on playgrounds, bean pole teepees, bamboo cuttings lend themselves to kind of creating shelters with. So looking for the loose parts that you can start to have in your school ground or take advantage of in the woods that are near where you are to make special places. Small worlds in gardens, so encouraging small world play. There was a great example from this woman that teaches at the Bowdoin Early Child Care Program. So she had 4-year-olds, and all the 4-year-olds were doing on the playground was playing Power Rangers or some other similar media-generated, combat play. And so over the series of about 3 or 4 weeks, they started to leave little tiny footprints on the playground one week, and then the next week there'd be little tiny hats on the playground, and the kids got really intrigued by what is it, and they eventually the children came to understand that there were fairies visiting the playground and they needed places to live, and so the teachers were providing them with raw materials for making places for the fairies to live. And she documents really nicely how the play transmuted from media-generated play to the kind of more traditional kind of creatures of the woods play by using the small world invitation. I love this. I want to make one of these. It's so inherently appealing to find the right kind of stones for that kind of stone building. This is a great example from the Mini Trista Cultural Center in Muncie. And the Mini Trista Cultural Center is basically on the grounds of the Ball estate. So the Ball jar, the Ball family, big set of Victorian houses and beautiful gardens. So they have a teacher at the Cultural Center who's a dancer who decides she's going to do a program on flower fairies. And so each child is going to choose one of the flowers that's in the gardens, and that child is going to create a character that's the flower fairy for that flower. And so the child has to look at the flower and then, with assistance, this is like with 7- and 8-year-old kids, with assistance create a costume that is inspired by the look of the flower, and also has to design a dance, a movement repertoire, also inspired by the habit of the flower. So irises are tall and showy, and lilies of the valley are kind of, are going to be small and hidden. So the lily of the valley movement is going to be much more discreet and tiny, and the gestures are going to be smaller. And then on Midsummer's Eve, the solstices, for a couple of nights or in a row, they light the gardens with Candelaria, and the flower fairies perform, right? And in the beginning, it was just girls, and then boys wanted to do it too, so they incorporated the boys. Now, I say that this is biodiversity curriculum at a developmentally appropriate level for 7th and 8th graders, because the message is each flower has its own character and its own special way of being in the world, so it has its own uniqueness. So the whole notion of biodiversity and each, that what we want is a diverse set of flora and fauna, this is the right way to get at it, through using the child's fascination of becoming a flower. Maps and paths as engaging parts of landscapes. At the school that I was at this afternoon, there's this, it's Edgewood, right? Yeah. Edgewood? Yeah. There's this nice little kind of sumac slope, young sumac slope, with sumac and a little bit of cottonwood and a couple of other things. But it's just the right slope, and it's just high enough that what's really fascinating to the kids is making and following these little paths through this little thicket. Animal allies, this whole notion of children becoming friends with animals and then mimicking animals. So much of what children want to do is become animals. So I did this great curriculum once where I was working in a nature center, a program for 1st through 3rd graders, and one of those week-long programs, and all the environmental educators said, well, let's give the kids those little nerd binoculars. They didn't call them nerd binoculars. I call them nerd binoculars, the toilet paper tubes connected together. Is somebody doing that right now with their children? Let's give the kids little nerd binoculars and go look at birds. And I say, no.
They work.
Yeah. Well, try this. I said, no, we're not going to do that yet. We're going to have the kids become birds. What they really want to do is be birds. They don't want to watch birds.
That's true.
Okay, so we got big refrigerator boxes, and each kid would lie down on the refrigerator box, and then with a marker you trace around their bodies, but you don't go, when you get to their hands, you don't go down here, you go down like this. And that essentially, you trace out a pattern that's going to become a set of wings. And so then you cut out the cardboard, you use twine to strap it on. Each kid gets their own set of wings, and then the class or the group of kids becomes a flock of birds. And then you play at being birds. In the process, the kids start to say, look at that bird. That one's got brown on the back and it's all white down here. And they say, okay, why don't you paint your wings like that bird, right? And then the kids want to know what kind of bird they are, right? And so then you start looking through, you look through the bird books, and then eventually you get involved in the watching birds. So the process is this animal ally thing. In the early years, kids want to be animals. So you want to figure out the way in which to provide access to becoming animals before you try and watch them or observe them or do the science part of it. So great, having a bird blind that does allow you to observe, or having kids build nests. We did this great project at a school in Massachusetts where the local zoo wanted an eagle's nest adjacent to the eagle enclosure, so that when kids came to the zoo with their families, the kids could climb inside a life-size eagle's nest. And they're really big, And so the children, the 1st and 2nd grade kids, as part of the curriculum, went to the zoo and helped to construct the eagle's nest. Hunting and gathering. This whole, leave no trace thing is not appropriate for young kids. I'm going out on a limb here. Some interesting research that contends that it's the gathering and consumption of stuff in the natural world. That's one of the sources for environmental behavior as an adult. And so, within limits and where appropriate, the whole process of collecting and ingesting stuff is a really important part of getting kids to become environmentally responsible. Adventure. This is a wonderful little downtown installation on the Boulder pedestrian mall. And it's simply this assemblage of boulders, and it's really fun to sit and hang around here for a half an hour and watch kids of different ages challenge themselves on this little construction of boulders. So this is the kind of stuff that we're trying to build into natural playgrounds. Here's a nice, for instance, of looking at some of these design principles with 2nd and 3rd graders in New York City. So this is the Manhattan City and Country School, Upper East Side, about a mile from Central Park. So the teacher, 2 days a week, decided, okay, we're going to the Central Park 2 days a week. One afternoon is going to be mostly for nature play. The other day is going to be for curriculum. So this is on the day that they go and do nature play in Central Park. So they cross over Central Park East. And this is the set of things that the kids were doing. Yeah, this was fascinating. There is no adult supervising this activity. I later said to the teacher, I said, you're in the 1% of teachers in the country that would allow this to happen. This little girl jumped back and forth across this chasm about 17 times while I was watching. Did it fine every time. She worked hard to try and convince her friends that they should do it. She never convinced them. But so this is, kids inherently want to do adventures, and this teacher was allowing them to do adventures. So this was another adventure form. She had ropes. The kids could take the ropes and do these little rock climbing experiences. Again, they've been taught how to do this, but one child is belaying and the other child is trying to climb up the rocks. And so I'm interjecting this. This is a T-shirt that Play Wales play workers wear that says better a broken bone than a broken spirit. You can imagine how that plays in a lot of the United States, right? The kids at this same one chunk of rock, there were these adventure activities going on. There were kids constructing special places with twigs that they found. There were kids making small worlds. This one small world was in this little pothole. This is all, if you know Central Park at all, there are these big outcroppings of pudding stone. So this is one of those big outcroppings of pudding stone. They were doing a different form of adventure play by filling up one of these potholes with leaves and then jumping into them. And then everybody had left. I was still writing notes. This one child came back because he had left his hat there. He finds his hat. He's starting to leave. He turns around and really just to the rock, because he's not paying attention to me, he says, "Thank you, rock," right? And it was, again, the illustration of when you allow kids to have this kind of opportunity to play, it's that sense of appreciation for the natural world. Great example of a downtown, this is South Street Seaport in Manhattan, not so much natural materials, but loose parts materials. This is a tiny little plot with a zillion kids in it. And the premise is it's these kits of loose parts that people bring, and they unload these. These are kind of dense polystyrene that get used as constructions in this beautiful area that's kind of that's got sand and water in it. So this whole idea of providing loose parts, and if you're in downtown Manhattan, you don't have access to a lot of limbs and sticks, you bring these kinds of things. So this is what this playground looks like. Here's some nice playground structures from Berlin, and here's this one, Rethinking Liability. This is great, is that there's one big insurance company that insures a lot of Berlin adults. And through actuarial research, they found that kids who had more physically active childhoods grow up to be safer adults. They grow up to be safer adults who file fewer insurance claims, right? And therefore save the insurance company's money. So, this is from my friend Sharon Danks. So, the insurance companies are encouraging and funding the construction of risky play structures, moderately risky play structures, because it's an investment in their long-term economic viability. Kind of interesting, different point of view. And I'm just going to end with some nice examples of natural play areas. If you've got access to the woods and fields and prairies, you don't need this stuff. But if you don't, then naturalizing the play areas are really good. Big initiative by Robin Moore's organization at North Carolina State to prevent obesity in early childhood through designing more active play areas. And so this is what they look like. Incorporating slopes into play yards, really important. I love this thing. The idea with this rough stone is that the stone that where you've got uneven steps that moves around a little bit is better for kids' kinesthetic proprioceptive development. You know, you have to do more adjusting. Here's just again a couple of mounds at a Montessori school in Durham, North Carolina. Taking advantage of drainage problems where you have drainage problems in areas, turning them into, you know, stone-lined areas that'll carry water that will also become nice play areas. So they're not always kind of muddy, but they'll have running water in them. You can play in them. Even though I watched fantastic mud hole play this morning, that was just, you know, it's kind of like the special places stuff. I'm fascinated by how kids can spend half an hour, 45 minutes jumping into the same mud puddle over and over again. It's just like remarkable. These nice little carts to move stuff around at the Wellesley College Child Center. I also had a student who did this, had documented some of her great learning, and she did this great thing on brooms. Brooms of all sorts and sizes as play, as equipment for play areas for 3- and 4-year-olds. And kids love to sweep stuff up, you know, and clean stuff off. And nice preschool sand play area, really important in a lot of thinking about natural play areas in early childhood programs to provide appropriate seating and shade for adults in conjunction with the play structures for kids. The big idea here is this John Burroughs quote of knowledge without love will not stick, but if love comes first, knowledge is sure to follow. You know, what we want is before we start to dump the academics and the environmental learning onto kids, what we have to do is get them to love the natural world. And then, as we've seen from the examples here, if you do the bonding part, then the knowledge part is grows in a much more kind of healthy and normal way. We're done.